As a fan of horror novels and movies, I had often read the phrase, "the colour drained from his face," and thought nothing of it. To me, it was just one of many overused clichés, or at least I thought of it that way, until I saw it actually happen in real life. When that howl ricocheted out into the street, cutting through the hush like a razor dragged across a naked throat, Whale turned white. All the vitality and energy seemed to leak and leach out of him in a single moment, as if it was being released from a tap attached to his feet. His eyes widened, and his jaw, for a moment, hung uselessly open. It is hard to explain quite how terrifying terror itself is to see. Something about seeing Whale's face, the face I recognized as a banner for the law, for justice and order, showing such blind fear, chilled me to the bone. Still, bravery does not mean being fearless. It means being scared to do something, but still doing it anyway in spite of that fear. Whale was undoubtedly scared, but he was also admirably brave. Without saying a word, he paced toward the house, beckoning me to follow. On the way, he stopped and tied his dog's lead to a lamppost, then moved gingerly toward the house. The howl rang out again. I said earlier that I broke into 3 different places. Technically it was 3, but there was very little breaking involved with the third. Whilst I would happily have kicked in the door of Blackwell's house had I had the strength, or stood by and helped as Whale did so, there was no need. The door relented to the lightest touch. Clearly the door had been left open intentionally, not to allow us to enter in, but to let whatever was raging inside go out and hunt, pushing the door gently so that it yawned, silently open. Whale glanced nervously back at me and with slow, exaggerated care, stepped cautiously over the line of silver buttons so as to leave them undisturbed. 20 minutes earlier, when I had garbled out my theories about Blackwell, when I'd explained the old folklore, the methods for killing or releasing the wolf, and why I had broken into the sewing shop, he had looked at me as if I was insane.
The buttons are solid silver. It says so right in the window. Werewolves fear silver, like a lot of supernatural creatures. If you mark a circle with a silver chain and stand inside it, or make a line of silver coins, a werewolf cannot cross it. I've laid the lines at the front and back of the house to stop him from getting out. He's trapped in there, but the thing is, he might be trapped in there with my sister. We have to go in.
Now, with that violent, curdling howl escaping from out of the house, his mind was far more open. He was prepared in the moment to accept anything and everything that might help, including my silver button trap. Stepping into the house, Whale was frantic, searching every corner of the room for movement. The space was illuminated by a single candle, but was, for all intents and purposes, a normal, if slightly cluttered living room. Toward the back of this room, however, before the corner and a sharp turn to the kitchen, was a large black hollow, the space that led down to the basement and the door that had been left open. I don't know what it is about basements, cellars, and attic spaces. Why are these areas, even within our own homes, so filled with the potential for fear? Perhaps it's some hangover from the belief that heaven is above hell below and that men are not supposed to venture into either space whilst alive. Perhaps it is just that these spaces on the very edge of our living quarters have replaced the darker corners of the cave, the edge of the forest, or the dark between the trees as the forbidden areas, where, our imaginations tell us, things could be waiting in the dark. In this case, we didn't need to imagine. When the howl came again, it was obvious where it had come from. It escaped from the bowels of that house and gurgled up through the walls, enclosing the basement stairs like a cry from out of a throat. Against the black stone walls, you could see the dim flicker of dancing shadows made by candles lit below. Whale turned to face me. He was visibly trembling.
You stay here. If I'm not back in 5 minutes, you run into town, bang on every door, scream at the top of your lungs, and break some windows if you have to. Just get people's attention and get them here.
I shook my head. If Dawn was down there, then I was going down there too. Plus, he might be the police officer, but I knew more about what we might find down there and how to kill it than he ever would. Shaking his head as he accepted that it would be futile to argue, Whale began the slow descent down the stone steps and into the basement. As the sound of the howl receded, it was replaced by a terrifying stillness. It was, I thought, the silence of waiting. I remember hearing the gravelly rasp of Whale's boots on the stone steps, the quick stuttered gasps of his breathing as it attempted to keep pace with his furiously beating heart. I remember how loud those footsteps seemed, there in the quiet and dark. I remember all these things in crystal clarity as adrenaline and hypervigilance brought even the smallest details into ever sharper focus. I remember the rough, wet texture of walls, the stink of dampness and mold, and the seeping cold stench made by decades of rot. I remember all of this, and I remember thinking even then, he knows that we're here. Reaching the bottom step with me trailing close behind, Whale didn't call out. He didn't cry.
Police, whoever is down here, come out slowly with your hands up.
He probably should have, but by that point fear had forced him into silence, wrapping its icy talons around his throat so that he could only mumble single whispered syllables. The room was large and dark. The only light came from 2 candles, standing on what appeared to be an altar of some kind. On this small table, covered with a cloth and filled with elaborate designs ranging from astrological symbols to Norse runes, was a large copper bowl set up on a tripod over a gas burner. There was other paraphernalia, a black candle, a wand or pointer tipped with silver and made from ash bark, a large copper dagger of the type I had read about, and 2 or 3 chalice-like cups. Behind these items, in a collection of jars and small bottles, like something from an alchemist's workshop, were a congregation of miscellaneous substances. Some were liquids, others herbs, and still more were red or yellow hunks of waxy or gelatinous substances. Some were like butter, others like huge wobs of trimmed animal fat. To one side of this bowl, a large, leather-bound volume, which I could see even at a glance was of considerable age, and covered with illuminated calligraphy of the kind one might find in a medieval manuscript or hand-copied Bible, lay open with its page marked with a ribbon. I did not need to guess what kind of magic the information on that page contained. The clues were all around us. He had done this, and had done it on purpose. Whale glanced back at me. His mouth has hardened and pursed into a thin straight line as he clenched his jaw and pushed his lips together as if to stifle a scream. Though, what I really think he wanted to say was, "You were right." Instead, he nodded to me and holding out one hand signaled that I should stay put, there at the bottom step, and not go any further until he said so. Still, whilst I did as he suggested and stayed rooted to the spot, my eyes continued to travel around the room, drinking in and surveying everything that was visible, soaking up the details and building piece by piece the outlines of a story. Above this profane little altar set up, pinned to the wall, were enough wolf and werewolf images to fill an entire scrapbook. This clearly was an obsession with some warped mania that had led this lonely man to fixate on the figure of the wolf, to find in the werewolf trope, with all its savagery, aggression and bestial violence, some trait or twisted idea that was missing from his own life. Some of the drawings I had seen before, such as the 1512 woodcut I had viewed in the library, others were more obscure and entirely new to my eyes. What was not new, what I had seen many times before, was the small collection of artifacts nailed to the wall amongst and between these repulsive drawings. Hanging from an iron nail around halfway up was a daisy hairband and a bracelet made from coloured beads that had once belonged to my sister. On the floor, to the left of the table, barely visible in the dim half-light, were scraps and fragments of the red hooded duffel coat she had been wearing, which, despite its vibrant colour, still showed up the crimson stains splattered all across it. I think I knew then that Dawn was dead, but it was seeing the teeth that confirmed it. On that table, just before the bottles of ingredients, was a clear glass jar, almost half full, with teeth. Milk teeth and fully grown molars, human teeth, some of which still had the ragged pulp of ruptured gums and nerves attached. Some of which, glimmering like mocking jewels in the candle's restless flickerings, had metal fragments on them. Pieces of the braces Dawn had been fitted with only weeks earlier, those were my sister's teeth sitting in that jar. It was then I knew for certain Dawn was dead. Still, it was not the overriding horror of these small teeth that kept my attention in that dark, lonely place. For as my eyes had moved to the left of the table, the coat and the wall, to the very edge of the visible, where the light from the candle dared not reach, I saw not a set of milk teeth, but fangs. Long, protruding canines, jutting out from a wrinkled snout, just visible at the edge of the candle's reach and above them, eyes fixed on each of us with a glassy, vacant disdain. An animal glare, devoid of rationality, of mercy and conscious thought. eyes that scowled and boiled and watched. Now there was no howling, just the sound of quickened heartbeats as low and curdling growls spilled out from the shadows.